Hello, I'm Colleen Gallagher, CEO at OnWrd UpWrd, and you're listening to the Association Insights podcast, where each week we interview association leaders from across the country to hear how they're trying new things, taking big risks, and delivering value for their members. We'll explore the realities of what it means to work in and with associations and bring you the insights and inspiration you need to advance your career and make big changes at your association. Let's get started.
You're listening to the Association Insights podcast, and I'm your host, Keaveny Hewitt. Today's episode is part of our Gen Z Insights series brought to you by Highland, where we're spotlighting rising Gen Z voices shaping the future of associations. In this episode, we're joined by Rachel Grace Leman from the Association of Corporate Counsel. Rachel Grace has worn many hats in the association world, from publications and web to her current role in education and program development, and I'm thrilled to chat with her today. Rachel Grace, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dig in and talk about Gen Z and associations.
Me too. Let's dive in. Let's start with a very basic, simple question. Would love for you to tell us a bit more about your association, the Association of Corporate Counsel, and what you guys do and who you represent.
Yeah, so ACC is a professional organization, and so our client base is entirely people who have the same job, and that job in our realm is in-house counsel. In the years I've worked at ACC, I've noticed that fewer people know what in-house counsel means off the bat than I thought, but that basically means that they're all attorneys or they're all attorneys or legal operations professionals, but rather than working for private practice for a law firm or in public practice of any sort, they're all employed by an organization, and their only client is the organization that they are employed by. So working in the legal department of an organization, no matter the size, comes with a certain unique set of challenges and legal concerns. And so our role at ACC is to help in-house counsel and other in-house legal professionals address those concerns through a combination of education, networking, resources, advocacy, all of the good things that a bunch of associations do.
Awesome. I know when we first spoke, I was like, what is corporate counsel? Because I was one of the people who was like, I don't know what that means or what that entails. So very
it is
that distinction.
It is an association that I think has a less easily understandable name than a lot of other ones. It's not as explicit as many other associations. Corporate counsel, that does require some sort of background knowledge of what that is.
Exactly. I know at the association you've worked in publications, web content, and now program development. So what led you to do association work, and what has kept you there for so long?
I imagine I'm not the only person who has this kind of story, but it was admittedly an accident to get into associations. I was fresh out of college. It was the middle of the pandemic and I needed a job, so I started temping, and I ended up with a temp role at ACC in their publications department. And I did a decent enough job that they liked me, so they transitioned me to a different contract when that contract ended into the web team. And so I did that for a while too. And then eventually it became a permanent position in the education department working in program development. So it was an accident, but I'm really glad that I stuck around. I'm glad that this is the permanent position that I ended up with, because I do think that associations are just so interesting and fun. And my role in particular, I think, combines a lot of interests that I have. So I just ended up being very lucky that my job just satisfies a lot of my desires. So back in college, I had studied both journalism and political science at the same time, and I found both industries extremely fascinating. But by the time I graduated, I knew I didn't want to work in either of them. I didn't want to be a politician. I didn't want to be a journalist, because I don't know if you've noticed, but both of those industries are pretty volatile to work in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially now. But my job now gets to combine skill sets from both of those industries and both of those fields in ways that I think are really fun and fascinating. So I'm very lucky that I get to use my history and my expertise, but I have that breadth, but I don't have to work in either of those industries itself.
I'd love to dive into that more. How do you think your journalism skills have translated into this current role of being in education and program development and management?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's so fascinating to talk about this. It's so much fun because I think there's a lot more overlap than people think. Having a journalism background, the skills that I get from having been a writer for a long time obviously translate into just working in a business and having to write a bunch of emails. But I think the more interesting skill set that comes out of my journalism background is more about like finding and managing speakers because that's a big part of my job in education. And so I actually joke pretty frequently that I don't have to be a lawyer to educate lawyers. My job is just knowing what lawyers want to hear about, finding people who can talk about that and then putting them in a room together. And journalism is basically the same concept where you need to understand your audience and what they want to hear about and what they want to learn about, find experts that can talk about that stuff and then interview them. So it's a different medium, but it's exactly the same concept. It's the same process. But so I still use some of those skills that I learned in doing interviews and trying to like get the right information that I want out of the experts that I'm talking to. But I do all of that during speaker prep. So I'm not the one who's doing the interviewing or the moderating on the stage. They're mostly doing that themselves, but I let them know what the audience wants to hear and I drive the conversation just before the conversation happens on stage.
I love that. Especially I studied PR, so no, in working with a bunch of reporters and journalists myself, like that really is their role is here's what audiences want to hear. Here's I have people who can speak to it and how do we bridge those together? So I love that's a skill that you're using in your current role. It's not just in a newspaper format where you need to be able to do that. It's this is super necessary in a lot of different fields, especially when you're working with people and needing to find experts who can engage your member audience and speak to what matters to them and what they care about.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What has been the biggest learning experience as you've taken on new responsibilities and grown in program development?
It's an interesting question because the biggest learning experiences haven't really been program development specific. It's just shifts in the workplace, right? We, as a content division, have gone through many, many changes in the time that I've been here. And I've only worked in this position for 3 to 4 years. So there's just been a constant amount of shifts. We've had our entire division reorganized a couple of times. We've had multiple rounds of unexpected staff departures. We They created a new C-suite level to oversee our division, and she's been excellent, but she's made a lot of like overarching strategy changes that have just changed the trajectory of our team in a lot of ways over the last few years. So the biggest learning experience has just been learning the value of adaptability and flexibility. Like being flexible and open to shifting responsibilities, I think is something that's really valuable in a worker. So I when I had first started, I used to have this fear of my job changing too much and having a disruption in my routine. And I'm really thankful for having all of these shifts forced upon me because now I'm not afraid of that anymore. I actually really appreciate the opportunity to take on new responsibilities because every single one of those shifts, those changes is a learning opportunity where I get to pick up new skills and I get to advance myself as an employee. So it's always valuable to learn something new and expand my skill set, even if it's not what I had originally envisioned my job to be, or even if it's not what's in my job description.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like flexibility is just the name of the game in every role, every space, especially in an association workforce as well. Being able to adapt, things are changing quickly. You really have to be able to be flexible and migrate to where you're needed. Doing some reflecting and looking back, is there anything you wish you knew before getting into the association space?
I don't know if there's anything I would have wished to know before I got into this space, but there's certainly stuff I wish I had known sooner, like it just earlier in my career, because I don't think knowing anything about associations before I got this job would change my decision to take it or impact the way that I kicked off the beginning of my career. But I do wish that I had known sooner, or even I wish I knew better now how to engage the association industry on the whole and like resources like ASAE or even this podcast. I'm not I'm not even fully there yet of really taking advantage of the community that is association professionals. And so like I'm just getting started learning that stuff now and I do wish that I had started that sooner.
I feel like that's really good advice for anyone listening to this who's starting off their career. Like there really is a community of people there for you to support you and help you advance and grow in this very unique space and industry.
Yeah, the sooner that you can practice your networking skills and learn those and hone those, the better. And like I said, I'm still learning that for sure. And I think I'm probably going to be learning that forever, but the sooner you can get on that, the better for you.
Agreed. Switching gears a bit to your current work of developing educational programs and speaker recruitment and creating really engaging conference programming and agendas. So, what would you say goes into planning a really impactful event or session? What are the big things that are needed?
I think one of the things that ACC is really good at in particular is that we make sure all of our content is member led. So, our association on the whole, our motto is by in house counsel for in house counsel. And so, we really take that to heart during our content planning process. Every single step of the way, we make sure that members and in house counsel are driving the conversation of what they want to hear about and how that conversation gets presented. So even from the beginning, we make sure that all of our program submissions, a majority of them are coming from members, they're coming from in-house counsel. And our program selection process is also led by in-house counsel. We always have an advisory board of members who decide what the final agenda of our conferences and events look like. We also, by the time we get to selecting speakers, we have a requirement. It's a speaker ratio that at least 50% of a panel has to be made up of in-house counsel so that we can make sure that perspective is represented in all of our events, because we want to make sure that our audience is hearing from their peers and they're hearing from people who have firsthand experience what their concerns are. So having that as a driver, I think really makes sure that our content is relevant and valuable for our audience. And so I'm really proud of the fact that ACC makes sure that our content is member led. But they're also volunteers, and there's certain things that they need some support with. ACC also just has a really robust education department on the whole that steps in when necessary for the things that our members are not experts on. So that's like logistics, session format, audience engagement, speaker training, moderator training, all of that sort of stuff. And I will say our ACC has a really good operations team. I work specifically on content development, but our program operations team is also really good at thinking about logistics and format and engagement of sessions. And when I'm thinking of our events, I'm very focused on the educational sessions because that's like my entire job. That's my bread and butter. That's my expertise. But our operations team is really good about thinking how to engage the audience outside of the fact, like outside of educational sessions and in all of the like ancillary conference event spaces and times. So all of the things that they need to consider about that, including like directional signing and branding and videos in other spaces. And we've had volunteer activities, all of the stuff that goes in our exhibit hall. Like there's a lot of stuff, and I will give credit where it is due that our operations team is really good about that. I'm more involved on the session side and making sure that those are engaging. And there's also a lot that goes into there. And I work really closely with our operations team to think about the logistics and such about certain session formats and that sort of stuff. But I will say, I do think the impact and engagement level of a session, 9 times out of 10, will hinge on your speakers and your presenters. Having a really good speaker is hard to do, which is why we invest in things like speaker training and moderator training. And we've actually engaged for the last couple of years a speaker coach, a professional speaking coach
Oh,
to
that's
help
awesome.
present. Yeah, she helps present those trainings, and she's really good at the technical things, knowing which words to emphasize and how to slow down your talk and slow down your pace, how to avoid saying another filler words. Like I've even had her do a training on how to hold a microphone because we had to have handheld mics for something. So she's really good at those technical things, which is super fun. She's also just a really great person, and I like working with her. But I will say, I think the thing that makes a great speaker that people a lot of times overlook is just like interaction. Just not only interacting with the audience itself, but also the other people on your panel. And that's something that I think people may skip over as they're thinking about what makes a good speaker. So if you're doing a hands-on workshop, the interaction is going to be built in. So it's going to be an easy win. I think if you're doing a hands-on workshop and you're a facilitator there, a lot of the attendees are going to automatically think that you're a good speaker because if you're standing right next to them and having a conversation, it's more personalized, it's more interaction, they're going to like you. If you're doing a panel and you're just speaking at them from a head table, it's a little bit harder. But I've seen some really good speakers take advantage of that space. And I think it's easier than a lot of people think it is. So I saw one speaker, it was one of the best sessions I'd ever attended. And I was really proud of being the person that planned it, but I know that its success was not really because of me, because the speakers were just really good. We
You played
were
a big part in that, I'm sure, making it all
I
happen.
it was also my first conference, so I don't know how much I actually had to do with it. But we were in Nashville, and I don't know if you've ever heard of these, but there's this snack in Asheville. In Asheville, there's a snack in Nashville called Goo Goo Clusters.
Yes,
Yeah, you know
they're
about these?
everywhere.
I had never heard of them before, but I don't even know if I can describe them super well. It's like a cluster is a good term for it, but it's like chocolate and marshmallows and I think a couple other things like maybe nuts or pretzels or something like that. They're delicious, I will say that. But the speaker was a Nashville local and we were in Nashville. And so he had bought a bunch of Google clusters and used them as incentives to get the audience to ask questions. So every time an audience member asked a question, from the head table, he would grab a Google cluster and chuck it at them. And it was great. Everyone loved it. He was also just a really funny person. So it was one of the better sessions that I've ever seen. Yeah, but so things like that, incentives for questions, but also just cracking jokes. If you make eye contact with the audience, they're going to be more engaging. But if you also, like I said, interacting with your fellow panelists, turn and look at them and make eye contact with them. Make sure you can still be heard by your microphone. But like these people are your peers. It's so easy to just turn and have a conversation with them, and it's a very easy way to elevate your session. I think another underrated tool is just asking the audience for a show of hands. I see so many speakers default to building in polls into like their PowerPoints or presentations. A show of hands is so easy. It's faster. It's an easy way to get audiences to like exchange information with you, but it's also making them physically move. And so having that movement will automatically wake up an audience. So I think it's an underrated tool for speakers to use to keep their audience engaged.
That is so smart because I feel like most sessions I've attended in the past few years have all been like, now download this app or click on this QR code, and then the the numbers are always sad because people don't really like, some people really do engage with them, but I've attended sessions or watched them where I'm like, oh my gosh, like 5 people out of a room of 200 filled this out. Like just raising your hand, right? It's like you're active, you're moving, it wakes you up if you've been at the conference for a while. Like it really does combine all those things together. So that's
Yeah.
a great little tidbit there. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And this technology is great. I'm not going to discount that. I love having the polling technology that we use. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to build an engaging session. But like sessions don't have to be elaborate to be engaging. There are a lot of simple ways to just elevate it, just the tiniest bit. Like a session, it doesn't need to have all of the bells and whistles. It just needs to have speakers who have energy and it needs to have movement. And if you have those two things, you're going to have a session that wins every single time.
I love that. It really is just going back to the basics of what made you pay attention in school. If a teacher had candy to hand out, of course I was going to raise my hand and participate. Like it really does. Or if there was an
Yeah,
activity we were moving around the classroom, like students are always more likely to be engaged. So it goes back to those basics of what did your favorite teacher do in elementary school? All right, mimic that when you're trying to
yeah.
engage a room full of professionals.
Yeah, for sure. And like you always had those professors in college who would like interact with interact with the people in the first couple of rows. Do that. You don't need to be interacting with the entire room, but if you see somebody in the second row that made a face at something you said, call it out. Like it's gonna be funny, everybody's gonna laugh. Like the whole room's gonna enjoy it. And that maybe that one person will be embarrassed, but you
For the
know,
benefit of the
prioritize the
learning
whole.
environment.
Exactly, exactly.
That's great. I know you've attended and led and really created a lot of engaging sessions and speakers and agendas like you've just been talking about. But have you noticed any shifts in how association professionals prefer to engage with these kind of learning opportunities, like whether it's format or length, or, we just talked about interactivity, but have you noticed any differences in virtual events or speaker engagement sessions versus something in person? What have you observed from there?
Yeah, there's a lot of trends in the just sort of events industry on the whole, sort of outside of associations industry that I think every events professional will tell you that COVID changed basically everything. I get the lucky advantage that I joined the workforce during and post COVID, so I never saw the before, but I hear people talking about it all the time. And I do think that coming out of COVID, people did have Zoom fatigue and they were a little tired of the virtual meetings and online education. And they want to take advantage of the in-person options that exist. Like I think they appreciate the value more of like physical interaction and networking. Like COVID also changed the game for online education, and just in that I think the level of online education has improved. So there are a lot more opportunities to get education online, but you can't get those interactive moments that people want. People, I think, are craving them a little bit more now that they experienced a time when they couldn't have them. But I will say, it's the most annoying part about planning events, I think, is that it's inconsistent among attendees how they want to get those interactive moments. So there are some attendees who want that interactivity built into their educational sessions that they're attending, because they're like, if make it worth getting education in person, because if you're not making this session interactive, I could have just done this online. I could have gotten my education virtually. So they want their breakout sessions to be workshops and hands-on, and they want to do the networking and discussions in the room. But then there are other people who are going to a conference to get all of their networking and interaction during the ancillary conference time. So during their exhibit halls and after hours events and just talking in the hallways in between sessions. Those kinds of people typically want their educational sessions to look more like a traditional panel. So we have these conflicting viewpoints in our attendees, where our attendees are split between whether they want regular panels that they've known for 50 years or if they want the more interactive workshops. And the way that ACC is addressing that that issue is to make sure that attendees have as many options as we can. So sometimes this means having more sessions on the agenda than we used to. We're trying to cut back on that just because choice fatigue is also a thing.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, but we try to make sure that there's options for people to do those hands-on workshops if they want to, but also have traditional panels. And we build in different session lengths of time. So we have 60-minute sessions, but we also have 75 and 90-minute. And we've started doing like TED style talks. So we've got these 15-minute really short bites of content. But then we also have a balance between the hard-hitting, legally substantive stuff that you can get your continuing education for, but also some sessions that are more about soft skills. We've used the phrase build your own conference in the last couple of years, where we're trying to give attendees the tools to make their own choices and build their own schedule in a way that meets all of their needs. Because really like we say all the time, you're just never going to please everyone. And we'll look at our evaluations after the fact, and you could read a comment about one thing and then 3 comments later, it's somebody saying the exact opposite. So you're never going to please everybody. You just got to give them the tools to hopefully make their own way.
I love that. I always say the phrase choose your own adventure. Here's a choice menu. There's a variety of options for every type of person and every length and format. And, it is so true. You really can't please everyone, especially when it comes to events and speakers. Everyone has their own opinions, and it is hard. It's also, I'm imagining, very frustrating to see someone be like, I love this. This is the best speaker ever. And someone be like, I hate this. It is probably very frustrating to work with. I don't know who to believe. I don't know what feedback to take here. But thinking about younger professionals who are attending ACC's events and speaker sessions, what innovative ways have you tried to make content and educational content specifically more engaging for those younger demographics like us who may not want to sit and hear a speaker talk for 90 minutes straight?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's part of they fit into the trend of people wanting to have those interaction, because a lot of Gen Z went to school or was graduating around the time of COVID. There was a period where they were all missing that human interaction, so they also want the more interactive programming. But again, it's a balancing act. Our younger professionals, our younger members, usually fall into the more interactive base. And we do have a conference, it's called Corporate Counsel University, which is specifically designed for new in-house counsel. In-house counsel, they can become in-house counsel at any point in their career. They're not necessarily younger professionals, but they do tend to be younger, newer lawyers, younger crowd. So for that conference specifically, we get to do a little bit more of the younger audience specific targeting. So we did build in 2 workshops into that conference specifically, because we did see that trend that they wanted to do more hands-on, more practical learning. I think practical is the name of the game, where it's the way that they learn. They want to take things home. They want to reference back to it. They want to have real life practice. So for us, having sessions that play on real world events and having hypothetical scenarios that they can actively think through and work through, I think that's been really successful. But I do think that some of this is just industry trend on the whole and less Gen Z specific. for in person at least. I think the way that we do online education for a younger generation certainly has to shift. And I will say as a disclaimer that like for ACC, because our membership base is in-house counsel, we haven't exactly hit the Gen Z market quite yet because the general like career trajectory for an in-house counsel is that people will graduate from law school and they'll go private practice for a few years, do their associate years at a firm, and then go in-house. And the oldest Gen Z graduated from law school just a couple of years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago. So many of them, some of them went straight in-house after law school, but many of them are just starting to go in-house. So we're needing to make this shift now. We haven't quite hit the ground running on it yet. But I do think that so I can more speak to this as a Gen Z person myself rather than how we're doing it for our members of how Gen Z consume educational content online. But I really believe that you have to meet Gen Z where they are. Gen Z, especially because they're new, they're entry level, they're new workers, they don't know how to find these resources online on their own. So you have to find them first and get them to come to you. And so I really think that means investing in social media. So Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even perhaps Twitch. Maybe that's the place where you need to put your advertisements. I don't know. It depends on your audience, but Gen Z really consumes content so quickly. And so the content that you produce has to be quick. And I have seen this may be a specific problem for ACC, but I have seen us in particular resist this a little bit of making shorter and faster content, specifically because of continuing legal education. So CLE is something that's huge in the education department at ACC. It's just a big part of our industry. It's a big part of just the content that we produce because CLE is a requirement for maintaining your license to practice law in the United States, depending on your jurisdiction. Like there's a whole lot of rules and it's very complicated to get into. But generally speaking, like we try to meet the rules of the strictest state so that it applies to all of the other ones. And that means for us that you can't get credit for a CLE course unless it's at least 60 minutes, which means that we have to be producing long form content in order to meet the continuing education needs of our members. And so because we need to be creating that content, our team has said then we can't be doing other things or we shouldn't be doing the shorter content that younger audiences would want. I would argue that you don't need to change the content that you're already doing, but you do need to be making more, right? It's not changing the existing content or your content strategy, but it's making additional content that's going to meet the younger members where they're at. And that can be creating something brand new that is 1 to 15 minutes, or it could be making derivative content of the longer content that you already have. But you want to be putting this shorter content in front of Gen Z's eyes where they already are and driving them to the longer content that you know they're going to need. Because we know that like Gen Z, if they're lawyers, they still need to get the CLE credit. They still need to be attending those longer sessions, but they don't know how to find it unless we put the shorter content in front of them first. So in my opinion, we at ACC, I suppose I should say, we need to focus on building a portfolio of having those like 1 minute vertical videos, like 15-minute summary videos that they can find on YouTube, and then driving them to the 60 or 90-minute CLE sessions that they need to get to keep their license up to date. And I think that probably applies to other associations as well. If you're trying to find younger audiences, if you're trying to retain them, go where they are.
I think that was all so well said, especially what you were saying about there is a requirement. This isn't to be an hour long, but we have to be strategic about how we get these younger professionals to sit through that hour because there's a need, they need this, but they don't know how to get there yet. And we have to be really strategic about the kind of content we're putting out as an organization that appeals to all ends of the spectrum, all different types of professionals. And going back to what you're saying previously, like I love, so fascinating that the career trajectory of a lawyer, typically it starts out in that kind of private practice space. So that makes sense that you guys probably don't have a ton of Gen Z members or a need right now to have really short content. But I love that you're like that someone's going to be graduating soon or that will have to be something we focus on because that's coming up. So that's just so fascinating to me that because of your industry and how people naturally weave throughout their career, you're like, all right, we have to make sure what we're putting out there, our content, our programming, our educational offerings mirror the kind of people we're getting into our association right now in 5 years and 10 years, like that's going to constantly be changing the makeup, and we need to make sure we're ahead of that. So that's great that you're already thinking through what's next and what's needed to get there.
Yeah, and like we want to be investing in them early, right? Ideally, we would be investing in them before they're in-house counsel so that the instant that they're a member. They know us, they're familiar with us, they trust us, they want to consume our content. So I do think that it's beneficial that we start thinking about this now before they are a large majority of our member base so that we have that foot in the door. And I will give us some credit that we have been working on it a little bit with those TED style talks that I mentioned. We call them ACC Power Talks. We're very proud of them.
Love that.
I actually manage that program, so I'm
Oh,
excited to
neat.
talk about it. But like we've just recently we started just doing them at our annual meeting. So they're live programs, they're short, they're quick, and then we record them. And a large part of the investment or the return on investment is how those programs live on online after the fact. So we invest in making them good on site so that they could be good after the fact, like online. And so we've just recently started posting them on YouTube. So they're shorter videos, but they're quick pieces of educational content. And then we even trim smaller clips of those and put those on LinkedIn and other social medias. So we're hopefully getting eyes on those that will drive them to the YouTube videos, which will then have a call to action to drive them to other things. So we're starting to do this. We're starting to test out this method, hopefully enough that when we do have a pretty decent amount of Gen Z in our membership, that we'll be able to meet those needs.
That's great. That was a perfect transition to my next kind of set of questions, which is all about Gen Z in the workplace. So I know when you and I first met, you said that your team had recently started hiring Gen Z professionals who are even younger
Yeah.
than you. So what has that experience been like? Please do tell.
Oh, it's so much fun. I love it so much. I will say, there's the only disappointment with it is just that they're not actually on my team. They're in the membership division and I'm in content. So we don't
Oh,
actually overlap a whole lot in like our actual workspaces. But as soon as they were hired, they almost immediately became my closest work friends. Like
oh,
it's so valuable to have people in your network and in your space that you can relate to. And it was honestly something that I don't think I realized I was missing until we hired younger folks. And it's just like there's something about Gen Z where we think the same way. Like they can say something and I don't have to think about how their brain jumped to that conclusion because my brain did the same thing, right? And just having that sort of camaraderie is just really nice. But that's like just on a personal note of how fun it is to have people in my space that are the same age as me, or they are a little younger, but it's very fun. On a professional note, like I said, I don't overlap with them in a lot of work projects just because we are in different divisions. But like they tell me about their work and I know what they're doing just because we are friends. And it's looking at myself 3 years ago when I was an entry level when I had just started. So it's very fun for me to be able to just almost see how much I've grown in ways that I hadn't even noticed beforehand because they've got this like green view of everything. They're still very anxious about a lot of stuff and sometimes I
oh,
laugh
back
at
when I
them and
was
I'm
your
like,
age.
exactly. I laugh at them and I'm like, you don't just relax. You don't need to worry about that. It'll be fine. And I may be totally wrong about this once I actually start managing other people, but I feel like I'm getting a first taste of managerial work, just getting able to guide them through the anxieties of their first year. It's very fun. So I'm not quite sure yet professionally how this learning experience is going to pan out, but because I'm in the middle of it right now, but I'm certain that it will. I think it's very fun. I'm glad to have them around.
That's awesome. I love that. Hopefully you'll get to manage some Gen Zers soon and can use your extra 3 or 4 years you got on them to guide them in the right direction. So overall across your organization, are there any generational differences that you feel like you notice either in your workspace or other workspaces or talking to members? I'd love to dive into that aspect of the Gen Z in the workplace conversation.
Yeah, I think this is a really valuable conversation. Like, I remember when I was in high school and people were having this conversation about millennials joining the workforce, and it's fun to be a part of the Gen Z iteration of that. I, in terms of differences, like generational differences, I honestly think the biggest one that I've noticed is just that I think Gen Z does not care about workplace politics, and so many older generations care a lot. And it's almost, if you look at the organization in the whole, it's almost like a gradient of the older folks are, the more they care about workplace politics, and the younger you get or the lower you get in the totem pole, the less people give a crap about it. But it's like In Gen Z, I think this manifests in a communication style that's a lot more direct, a lot more to the point. Like they don't like to skirt around the issues very much. I think there is still a pretty decent amount of like anxiety and fear in a lot of Gen Zs, more especially the younger folks who have just started, and that may be more attributable to the fact that they're just still entry level and still figuring out the workforce, like the workplace. But I don't think that people want, there is that fear, that anxiety, but I don't think that Gen Z want to like play the game of politics to avoid that fear. Like they don't, they're still afraid of pissing off the wrong person, but they don't want to engage in politics to skirt around that. And so I think this sort of manifests in a way that like Gen Z, if they're not 100% confident that whatever they want to say is going to be received in an overall positive manner, they just won't say anything at all. I think now that I'm a little bit more senior, and again, this is me saying senior just relative to the people who have just started last year, right? I'm not that far
Girl,
deep.
you're leading events and finding speakers. That sounds senior to me.
Decent enough. But yeah, you think 3, 4 years compared to my like CCO who's been here for a long time. I won't date her, but anyway. Like I just being a little bit more senior, I think I have unlearned a decent amount of that anxiety, that fear, but I don't like to engage in workplace politics, or I try to avoid it as much as I can, just because it doesn't sit right with me. And so I think this communication style of being a little bit more direct with Gen Z, it almost mimics the way that like VPs and C-suite levels like communicate with their staff. But like VPs and C-suite levels have earned that the right to be more direct because they're the ones that are setting the agenda, right? They've worked their way up the ladder, and so they have to be direct because of their position. Whereas Gen Z doesn't really understand why everybody's not just like that. So, like I said, it's like a gradient from top to bottom, right? Where the lower you get, the less you're engaging with this. So, like, I don't really engage in workplace politics at all with my boss. We just tell each other exactly how it is. But the more we're working with other people and higher ups, the more we have to do it a little bit. But I think that's the point is that I think it's a trend that I'm seeing. I may be wrong, but I'm assuming that as Gen Z starts to take on more managerial roles and work higher up the ladder, I think that workplace politics is going to play less of a role than it does now.
Hmm. I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next few years as more and more Gen Zs fill up the workplace and environment and the workforce itself.
I don't know that we're actually going to know exactly how this plays out until Gen Z are in like VPs and C-suite
Yeah.
levels, and we'll see who goes down the ladder. But
So
at
we're
that
the
point, we'll
top
be having
dogs.
conversations. Yeah, we'll be having conversations about Gen Alpha in the workplace, and
I
nobody's going to know
know,
what
like
that's
they're the
about. So
worst.
we'll figure it out in
iPad
30
kids.
years.
What advice would you give to associations that want to better attract and retain younger professionals like yourself?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. For one, it's just hire more of them. Because, like I said, this little crew of Gen Z folks that I've got at work now is such a blessing. It's so great. This little cohort around me, like that community is something that I want to lose even less than the pay and benefits, or just as much as the pay and benefits. Like I value it around the same amount. So if you can afford to hire a, a decent amount of young staff, I think that's going to be beneficial. I think that's going to play in your favor. But even just beyond that, if you can only hire 1 or 2 Gen Z folks, if you only have a few entry level positions open, invest in them, invest in those employees. This is a misconception that I think I hear a lot about Gen Z, that they have all of these demands for the workplace, that they have all of these ridiculous expectations, that they're entitled. I find it funny when I hear that from older generations because it's like we got this from you. We learned this from older generations. So it's all about these kinds of conversations around like healthcare and mental health support and work-life balance, PTO, other benefits, protection from sexual harassment, and all of that kind of stuff. And the reason why Gen Z value that so strongly is because we have never worked in a workplace in which people weren't talking about those things. We've never worked in an era when these things were not discussed. So like we came into the workforce when these conversations were already happening. So like we know to want them. We know that these are things that we should be asking for. But I don't think that Gen Z necessarily expects them because like I said, we came into the workforce when these conversations were happening, but the conversations were happening because organizations needed to work on them, not because they were already happening. So I don't think Gen Z, especially when we're entry level, have an expectation that our employers are going to meet all of those expectations or needs or live up to all of those requests. I think that like we're coming into the workforce, I think Gen Z is actually just expecting the bare minimum. So if employers and organizations are doing just even a little bit beyond that, I think your Gen Z staff are going to stick around for a while. Ideally, you would be doing a little bit more than the bare minimum, but I don't think that Gen Z are expecting as much as a lot of employers think they are expecting. You don't have to meet every single request. You just have to do enough. And I will say, I think a lot of those requests, a lot of those workplace concerns that Gen Z have, I think a lot of them are covered by company culture and not necessarily by formal benefits.
Mm.
So I don't know that it's actually going to cost organizations a whole lot in terms of bottom line or budget to be able to address a lot of the concerns that Gen Z may have. Like I'll say in my own experience, a big reason why I'm so dedicated to ACC and why I've stuck around and why I plan to stick around is because of my direct supervisor. She's just a really excellent and supportive person. She's been a great sponsor for me, and she has gone to bat for me since even before day one, since before I actually started in full time in her department. And so, like, it's less about the formal benefits that like HR is offering, and it's more just about the environment that you're creating for your Gen Z staff and making sure that they feel safe and respected. That I think is going to go a long way. And yeah, a decent paycheck in healthcare isn't going to hurt, but
We'll take that too.
exactly. So just invest enough in your Gen Z staff that they feel like you value them beyond just somebody on payroll.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think you brought up a really good point about how these conversations started. We don't know a workplace or a job without these kind of standard conversations around making sure everyone mental health and safety and emotional well-being, like those, that was almost reactive from a lot of organizations and companies, and now it's expected and it's a standard. So it's just really fascinating to think about how we don't really know a world without that, because we started the when we entered the workforce, that was expected and was starting to get trickled into more and more organizations and become more and more of a norm. So it makes sense that we would, of course, expect that to be the same at any place we work or any organization we work for.
Like Gen Z, I think every single Gen Z graduated after the Black Lives Matter movement, after Me Too, and after all of these conversations were already happening. Like we grew up with the Affordable Care Act. Like these conversations have been had for a lot longer than we've been employees of organizations. So this didn't originate with us. If you're looking for somebody to blame because you don't want to do these things, it's not us.
Well, and also to that point too, these conversations were happening at really pivotal points in our childhood and our development when we're growing up. So they're almost core values for us as individuals, but also as employees, because that it goes back to it's, oh no, that was happening. Black Lives Matter was during my high school and college years, and we can't discount the pandemic at all. That obviously brought up a
Right.
lot of things as well. And like we were children and kids and adolescents during a lot of these big life moments that were happening in the world, and that impacts what we value and what we're passionate about, and that makes sense that it would be expected in the workplace, because I'm like, no, that's kind of people we are, and this is how we grew up and this is the experience that we went through.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that like we're the oldest of Gen Z, right? Like I was born in 1997. A lot of people would consider me more of a cusper than like full Gen Z. So that's why like my younger coworkers, they're way more Gen Z than I am. And we're just getting started with Gen Z in the workplace. There's 10 more years of Gen Z people to graduate from high school and college and to enter the workforce. These trends I think they're just gonna keep going. It doesn't start with us, it certainly doesn't end with us.
Yeah, and I think it's even more fascinating to think about too. So my younger sister she's 7 years younger than me. So she's technically Gen Z as well, but she's a junior in high school. So it's very different life stages, but still both Gen Z. And even to think about, she doesn't know, like I know a world without technology, like or without a smartphone, for example, and she doesn't. She was 2008, like that's when iPhone was out. So it's even those kind of things impact how you work and how you think about work. My sister's also Gen Z, but she's a different type of Gen Z because she was 10 when COVID happened. She wasn't 21 or 22. She was still a little kid. So it's like that will impact how she works and interacts in a work environment in 7 or 8 years from now too.
Yeah, the way that technology changed so rapidly in our childhood years is just, it does make for very different brands of Gen Z, even in that one generation. Even the things that I'm talking about today, I think they may be old news in a couple of years when we get more Gen Z in the workplace. Who knows?
Exactly. This is a perfect transition to my favorite part of the podcast, which is our Gen Z Just for Fun questions. It's a little lightning round style series of questions to let our audience get to know you more. First one, which I know I'm excited to hear your thoughts on, but what was your favorite TV show growing up?
Oh, this is such an interesting question to me because I guess I have a follow-up question. Define growing up because I could have a different answer for elementary school and middle school and high school. It
So
could run the
fair.
gamut.
Let's say like elementary school, like going
Elementary
way
school,
back.
honestly, the first show that I thought of was Cyber Chase, which I don't even know if that's a show that everybody knows. It was a PBS show, and I just remember coming home from school and immediately sitting on the couch and wanting to watch it. But it was probably, oh, I'm trying to think of what years, probably somewhere between 2008, 2010, around the time that I was watching it. But it was like about kids who got stuck in the internet. I don't even know how
Classic.
I could describe the plot. Yeah, but I wasn't a Disney kid. I wasn't a Nickelodeon kid. I was a PBS kid, and I have, of course, the most obscure PBS show to recall.
No, I was a PBS kid. I would say I was split between PBS and Disney, but PBS was my go-to when I was homesick because they just had good shows all day long. Because Disney would change from like little kid shows to like kind of
Yeah.
more like teenage shows, but PBS was like a standard. So whenever I was homesick with some sort of illness, I was always just like PBS for 8 hours straight.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. See, PBS would also, they would show some Disney shows on Saturday mornings. So my sister and I would wake up
Oh,
and we would get like old reruns of Hannah Montana and Sweet Life.
you're like,
So I've
yes.
seen some of them, but I wasn't like dedicated enough to be a fan because we weren't watching it throughout the week.
That's I didn't know they did that. That's funny.
Yeah.
Got to watch some of the old ones. What is a nostalgic snack or food from your childhood or any point in your life, but your childhood specifically that you still love or brings back good memories?
Oh, this happened very recently. I went to the store and for some reason I was browsing the fruit snacks aisle and I saw fruit gushers and I was like, yes,
Stop.
absolutely. I'm gonna buy those. So I bought them for me as an adult. Like sometimes I can't be trusted with adult money because I just spend them
Same.
on fruit gushers and it was totally worth it.
You're talking to the right person because I did that, I would say not even 6 months ago, because I was never allowed to have fruit snacks or fruit gushers were definitely off the table, but fruit snacks were like not at all in my lunchbox. And so I, with my adult money, 100% will spend it on the stuff I was
Ah,
not allowed to have. Take that,
yeah, and
mom.
exactly. I don't think we ever bought them ourselves either. Maybe once or twice when we were kids, but I would poach them off of my friends out of their lunch
Oh
boxes all
yeah,
the
I'd be like,
time.
just one gusher, please. Literally, I'd be like, just one is fine. No, those were when someone pulled that out of their lunchbox, like most popular kid in school that day. I'm like, that's like having gum, and 15 people are like, piece, kind of piece, same
Yes,
kind of thing.
exactly. Yeah, see, I'm the most popular kid in school as an adult now.
Yep, I love that. If you could bring back one trend from early 2000s or 2010s, what would it be?
Oh, instant answer, silly bands.
Yes, love silly bands.
Oh man,
What
I
a random thing.
I
Like,
know they were so weird. I don't know why. I just recently was thinking about them, and I was like, I would be so obsessed with those as an adult. Like, I want them to be a thing so bad. I just really love collecting things. So I am 100% the kind of person that would just have a ridiculous collection of silly bands, and I would spend time in the morning deciding which one or two that I'm gonna wear on my wrist. It's literally just a rubber band, but it's a rubber band with a secret. Like you don't know
you
that
don't know
when I
what it's
take
gonna
this rubber
be.
band off of my wrist, it turns into the shape of a cow.
No, I was like, I don't even want to know how much money I spent of my money and my parents' money on silly bands because those were not cheap. From what I remember, they were expensive for what they were. And I had a ton of them and spent so much of my allowance on rubber bands, but it was just so fun like trading. I think they got banned at my school eventually because it was
Oh
taking
yeah, I think ours
taking
too.
over like learning or whatever.
All the way up in their
Oh
arms. Yeah.
yeah, my parents are always like, "You're gonna cut off the circulation on your arm. You
Yeah.
need to.
They're
You can only
ridiculous.
wear like three." No, kids would
They're
literally
so
come with like
silly.
the full sleeves of silly bands.
Yes,
Oh
exactly. Yeah, I have no idea what they cost when we were growing up because I had no concept of money.
yeah,
But I would spend money on them now. I would if they were still a
no,
thing.
it was so fun to trade them at recess, and there was limited edition ones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that brought
Oh, I
back
think
so
I
many
had
good
one that glow in the
memories.
dark.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Those were
Yeah,
cool.
they were so fun. They were fun. Of course, teachers were banning them. We got to suck the fun out of everything.
I know. I'm pretty sure it got banned from like my whole school, and I was like, I guess I just wasted a bunch of money on these things that I will no longer be able to bring to school.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah, but I would bring them back in an instant.
Let's do it. You heard it here first, folks. Silly bands are back. What is your go-to TikTok or Instagram scroll rabbit hole that you go down?
It, it only happens every 3 months or so. It's like once a quarter an event will happen. Pottery. I've never done pottery in my life, but for some reason, at regular intervals, it'll show up on my feed and I fall into it every single time. And I think part of it is that they're always, because pottery, just like the process of creating something, takes so long that it's always a go see part two for the final results. And I can't resist it. I have to go to their profile and see what the final pot looked like. And so then it, of course, convinces my feed that I'm obsessed with pottery, but it just happens all the time. I'll get out of it and I won't see it on my feed for several months, and then it'll come back and then it's there for several weeks, and the cycle repeats over and over again. I'll never get out of it.
No, that is exactly how my feed will be. My sister was joking. She was like, I watched one video about making sourdough bread, and now my whole feed is about making sourdough bread. Like, she was like,
Yep.
every single video. I was sitting there watching her scroll, and it was literally like 15 videos in a row about making sourdough bread. And she was like, what have I done? I watched one video, and now this is like everything. But the part twos 100% get me.
Yep.
I am such a victim to those. I'm like, I will have to go check out your page. And now
Yeah.
this trend is all that will show up on my For You
See,
page.
what's so funny to me about it though is that it only happens with pottery. Like I'll get some people doing like a home DIY or something and I'll go check out part two. That'll never show up on my feed again. But pottery, always.
They're like, we know she likes this.
I've never done it before. I don't know why.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that can be a summer hobby for you, is maybe you can become your own creator as well.
Maybe. We'll see.
Last question is to finish this sentence, which is, when I log off for the day, you'll probably find me
On my couch. I don't know what I'll be doing on my couch. Either watching TV, sometimes I watch YouTube. I like to read books. Sometimes I'm just scrolling my phone. Either way, no matter what, I'm on my couch consuming some sort of content.
Love it. That's a nice way to end the day.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about Gen Z and content. Yeah, I think
Yep.
that's suitable.
That sums it up. Oh, Rachel Grace, this was so much fun, and so fun to end on such a nostalgic memory lane
Yeah.
note there. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, and a big thanks again to Highland for making this whole series possible. But thank you again. I really enjoyed getting to learn more about you and all the great work you're doing at ACC.
Yeah, this was so much fun. I love talking about Gen Z. I love talking about content. I love all of this stuff. This was great.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's a wrap for today's episode. The Association Insights Podcast, previously known as the Association 100 Podcast, is a production of OnWrd and UpWrd Marketing and Communications, where our mission is to make associations and nonprofits the go-to source in their industries through earned media and thought leadership. This podcast is an extension of our newsletter, a bi-monthly collection of best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies delivered straight to your inbox. Have you undertaken a big change at your association? Or do you have some words and wisdom from the trenches of association life? We want to hear from you, and so do our listeners. Drop us a note at info@onwardupwrd.com. That's info@onwrdupwrd.com. Be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share with your friends and colleagues. We're available anywhere podcasts are found. Come back next week for more association insights and inspiration. Thanks for tuning in.